I am here to talk about helping you understand the value of the data that's contained in cartridges. Now we're going to be playing with some of these cartridges today. We're going to get to some fun when we do that. But first I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview of the future of tape, just to let you know that it isn't going away. We're going to concentrate on understanding the cartridge and how to preserve the data on it. And then at the end I'll touch on some emerging technologies, both some common and some emerging technologies. Can everybody hear me? Now, I don't know if this is positioned right, so if I need to, if I keep hitting it or something, let me know. All right, so the future of magnetic tape, we'll just talk about that. I'm going to concentrate on the two middle bullets. We'll finish with the emerging technology. So, future of tape. Magnetic media has been around for 50 years. It came out with computer tape back in the early 50s, and then the square tape back in about the 85 time frame. If anybody heard about the square tape revolution, and that was basically going from those reels that were hard to handle into the format, not unlike what you had in front of you, the square cartridge. So that's around the square tape progression. It's been the most reliable, cost-effective archival product out there in terms of storage of data. So we've got a very good existence going back many years. Now, in terms of the demand, how much data is going to be created going forward? The amount of data, and I think this University of California, Berkeley article has been around for a couple of years. It was updated from maybe 2000, 2001. I think this is the 2003 version. But it continues, the story continues to be the same. 5 exabytes of information are created every year. And I'm going to help you relate to what is an exabyte. More data will be created in the next 3 years than the previous 40,000 years. Also, in terms of, well, what does this mean for tape? In terms of worldwide production of new information recorded on storage media, that has grown by 80% since 1999. So we're talking about some really significant growth rates in tape storage. So that's all good news for data storage and tape in particular. The things that are driving that storage are long-term archive, the fixed content, things that we take pictures of that we're going to keep for all time, moonshots, data, the surface of the ocean. Those are things that are going to be captured and they're going to stay in that state forever. And then also all the compliance requirements. God bless them. We love them. Because they're driving so much, and if a company goes into litigation, I mean, the first thing we say is, gee, we feel really sorry for them, and the next thing we say is, yay, because they have to save every single tape forever. So that's a really good thing for us, not necessarily them. Now the disc versus the tape discussion. We hear so many times, disc is going to take over tape, tape is out. Well, that can't be further from the truth. When in truth, both of those devices are needed. Disk is very, very speedy and high reliability, and very expensive. Tape is pretty speedy, highly reliable, and relatively inexpensive. So from a data center manager, the right thing to do is be able to combine both. Tape is still, for the cost of ownership, the cheapest thing to store data on. But again, the adage that says, I'm going to put 90 days of data on my disk, and the other 90 years on tape still holds in today's environment. No one can store 90 years of data on a disk. It doesn't work like that. So again, those are the two things that's how we get around that particular question. So in terms of grounding you here now in kilobytes and exabytes and petabytes, I think kilobytes you're all familiar with. That's when we talked about reel-to-reel back in the 50s. We talked about kilobytes. Megabyte. In 85, IBM announced a cartridge, 3480 cartridge, that held 210 megabytes. Now, today, we're making gigabytes, cartridges with hundreds of gigabytes. And gigabyte is 10 to the 9 bytes. 20 gigabytes would contain all the collection of Beethoven. If you look at a terabyte, now a terabyte, 10 to the 12 bytes, 1 terabyte is equal to 50,000 trees that have been cut down and converted to paper. So it's a big number. All those trees. Or 100 gigabytes are a floor of academic journals. So now, the cartridges we're working on today, you'll see some of that later in the presentation, are terabyte cartridges. terabyte cartridge, terabyte is made, terabyte is made into the trees, that's the 50,000 tree analogy, but 10 terabytes hold the printed collection of the U.S. Library of Congress. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about terabytes. That's the technology that we're currently developing. Petabytes, 200 petabytes are all printed material. And the fact that I gave you earlier that says 5 exabytes worth of data is created every year. 5 exabytes is worth all the words spoken by human beings. Now, I guess that means the ones not spoken by human beings are not counted.
That included my wife.
I know. Yeah, your wife's in there. I'm sure she was. All right. So, in terms of the technology roadmap, now this is specific to the particles, the actual magnet that we're using. Back prior to 2000, the first magnetic particle we were using was on iron oxide tape. That was iron oxide. That was that small reel-to-reel. We then moved to chromium dioxide. That was for the stuff in the mid-80s, the stuff that held a couple hundred megabytes. Now for the MP products, and you would know those as 3480, 9840, 9940. Those technologies now are basically came in early 2000, 2001. But now we're into the MP2s, which is the LTO product, even more density. So what you see, the MP products are actually metal oxides also, but they've been altered in such a way that they now have become stronger magnets, and their field size is small enough so that a magnetic domain is smaller. Well, what happens if I can make my magnetic domain smaller? My trap can become smaller. So I have to do something visible to my magnet to allow for that size reduction. So you can see where we are on this in terms of these particles. We're in the dual layer now. We're working right now up on the 1 terabyte cartridge is an MP3, MP4 cartridge. But you can see the path then is to get up beyond that terabyte cartridge using a dual layer MP5 and 6. Now going into late in the year 2008, 2009, we're actually looking at sputtering, not unlike a high density disk. So that's the direction. So we have a lot of work that we're doing and we'll continue to do. Now, Imation is a core member of InSync, and the charter there is to set standards and fund research for beyond 2015. So these guys are way out there. InSync stands for International Storage Industry Consortium. So again, we're a core member. But you can see here, in terms of where we are today, in fact, the cartridge we're going to be taking apart here in a minute is 400 gigabytes or 0.4 terabytes. It moves data at 80 megabytes a second. What the InSync guys are working with in conjunction with Imation are a 12 terabyte cartridge moving at 830 megabytes a second, if you can imagine. So again, that's beyond the 2015 timeframe. All right, now, cost-wise, I told you that still tape is the most cost-effective media we can have out there. And what I wanted to do is show you this chart. On the y-axis, we have cost per gigabyte, dollars per gigabyte. Y-axis or x-axis is a timeline. The green line is media, and you can see the progression in cost reduction for media over time. Now, disk on the top end, those are the enterprise disks. So most of you know, these are the large customers who are sending the enterprise tapes. The next line down is would be the mid-range guys. Those are the ones that are sending in LTOs, DLTs, and that kind of stuff. This one we just threw in for comparison. It really, those two are the things that compare to this tape, but I threw it in there just so you can see it as well. Even the cheapest drive, this is the stuff that's used for the consumer, right? Even that drive, when you talk about cost per gigabyte, is still an order of magnitude off from our tape. So data centers wouldn't be using this kind of drive. They'd be up in the 15 to 40 range. So yes, the cost of drives are coming crashing down. They still can't beat 50 cents a gigabyte. Now, if Farmers Insurance had to go out and put everything that they now have on tape onto disk, we couldn't afford insurance, basically. If any of the people who we get products from or services from had to commit all their storage to disk, we either couldn't afford them or they'd be out of business. So that is what I wanted to do to help clarify that point on the disk. So, the fun stuff. All right. engineer, and I always love to take stuff apart. So I wanted to do that with you guys. What we're going to do, you all have a Gen 3 cartridge, and I have taken out 4 screws, and I've broken some internal pieces so that those can come apart. So I want you to take your cartridge out and take off the tape, or at least one side of the tape. First, you've got to get the plastic case off. Nobody likes the face. And then just kind of open it flat on your disc. Yeah, well, I'll help you put it back together if you want to. So don't worry about the stuff that goes flying out. It's not possible. Well,
easier when you don't have the snap corners.
huh? Well, and the snap, I had to pull those all had to come out when I did this whole process. But, right. So, what I want you to do first is take out the tape pack. So, this is the tape pack, this is the heart of the cartridge, right? So this one, so when we look at this, there's about 2,200, just a little bit over 2,200 feet on this roll of tape. Now, I want you to also feel the thickness of that. Feels pretty thin, doesn't it? Very thin. If you look at it, now if you try to pull a piece of it the way a drive would pull it, like this, put your fingers and pull it longitudinally, you couldn't break it, that thin little piece of tape. So, and that's how it's meant to run in a drive, right? I mean, pulling it like that, very, very strong. Now, if you took a piece of tape and you took a fingernail and just kind of broke the edge or were able to disturb that edge, you have to kind of pinch it with a nail. It's instant, right? Well, that little type of a crease can get done when you've got this sitting in a cartridge and it's on a spring, which I'll show you later. It bounces up and down. When it drops, there's a piece of plastic. This comes across, connects to the leader pin, and this piece right here can get that bottom piece of plastic, which can create a nick, which the next time it goes in the drive, can rip it just like that. So I'm just trying to give you an understanding of kind of what's in here. In the next couple charts, I'm going to show you how much data is written from side to side, but at least for that, I want you to give you a feeling of the feel of the tape pack, the thinness. If you run your finger over the top very gently, you'll be able to observe that you've damaged the edge. And in a few minutes, I'll show you how much damage it's been.
So you're saying that dropping them are very fresh, that it creates a little nick.
Right, and what that does, it keeps the tape intact, but if it creates a crack, it can go all the way across. But the minimum thing that happens is just that little bit of crease is enough to cause the drive not to be able to read the data that was written because it's turned away or toward or away from the drive. The drive has to have 100% registration to every place. So if a piece is turning away, it's not going to be able to read it.
How many feet did you say this is?
2231. And I'll get a copy of this presentation sent to you, so you'll have it. The transfer rate of this cartridge is 40 to 80 megabytes per second. So now let me help you understand how this thing goes back together because I also want to illustrate another point. So if you look at the base the part that doesn't have a hole in it, you put the spring on top of that little cross in the middle. And then you put the little brake button on top of that. Then this sits on, so I've got my spring, and then I've got that little flower thing on the top. That sits on there. Now, I just want you to press on it. You know, just kind of see what I'm doing there. So if I've got this on, I'm just showing you the cartridge. This spring basically allows some movement. Because what happens in the drive is a pull piece will come up and push on that, and will release that mechanism to move that tape out of the drive. What happens is that very spring works against us when we drop the cartridge, because we now have this wiring kind of effect up and down inside of the cartridge. Now, the other part of this I didn't talk to you about is this is a high density polycarbonate. It has some glass filled on one side and some on the other. It also is, so it's a plastic. And if you bend it with your fingers, you can bend it. When you do it, if you put it up to your ear, you will hear the crunching of little tape edges. That's pretty sad. But, that's kind of thing. So, yeah. And anyway, everybody about that. So, no, but the point here is, again, you're dropping it, you've got a spring bouncing this thing up inside. These edges are going to flex, which are going to crunch the edges of the tape. All these things are bad things to happen. But we need to have the spring because we need to have a mechanism for the tape pack not to move when it's not being used, but to be engaged when it is being used. So we have to have the spring. We'd love to make this tub out of high titanium, some titanium or carbon steel. If we did that, the drive would have to be as big as this table. But we want these small profile drives that fit in data centers and all that kind of stuff. So we have to look at the mass and how much it moves, how much it takes to move the mass.
So what happens when the tape drops, let's say, vertically onto the floor, the case cracks, we don't see any visible damage to the tape itself other than the jewel case? What's occurring on the inside?
You have sustained damage of some type. Now you don't know how much. Now I'm going to give you some tips for carrying handling later on. And one of my tips are, if you see a tape drop, then you bring it to the attention of your customer. Because the value of the cartridge is insignificant relative to the value of the data. So that's that, you know, and I'll point that out a little bit later.
But Mary, with that, the tape drives will compensate on a write for bad blocks on the tape, won't they? So if it was a scratch tape, for instance, and going back to the customer, they may not care because on the next write that'll be cleaned up.
Well, but see, if you actually damage an edge of tape and you can't read it, there's nothing that can be done because on the high density case they have servo tracks, written several servo tracks across here. It's like a yellow line down the middle of the freeway. If the drive cannot lock on one of those servo tracks, this is a paperweight. It cannot be accessed.
That's on the read.
That's
that's on a read, but on a write. My
On a
understanding
write?
was that, so say, let's
Yes,
say you get a
so on a write, what it can do is, they also have a thing called fatal suspended write. You're right, it will take some number of little hits. But at some point, it has a thing called, say you're writing a file, and a long file, and if it's taking you quite a long time, and you get a couple writes you can't write, you're fine. Then you get to a point where the drive is trying to close the data file, and you've written that block, and the drive comes back to check, and they do a checking algorithm and say, is everything fine? And the drive says, I can't read that block. So what you've done is it posts something called a media error. So even though, yes, you could write some, if the error is big enough or repeats itself long enough, then the drive will throw its hands up, and that's called an invalid end of data, which then sets this cartridge, kicks it out, it'll stop a job. So if that job's taking 32 hours on your last little block you wrote, you have a problem.
The only reason I ask is because what we've been told in the past is that if you get a shipment of tapes, that how those tapes were handled before they were first used is almost irrelevant because the tape drives will correct for any errors as they go, as they write.
No,
so it is possible to have a batch of tapes on delivery before they're written that should be replaced there and then.
Yeah, if you ever see a box of tapes delivered and the box isn't perfect, send it back. Identify it with the courier and send it back. because there's just no way to predict it. I mean, and we replace tapes, customers do that, we replace the whole shipment, because you just can't take a chance. Now, you're right, there could be some there, but if you use it, you take a chance. And the thing about when you damage edges, like you would do in the shipping damage, it gets worse with time because you're not running through that tape path. And when you look at, the sophistication, those high-end enterprise drives I was talking about, those were $50,000 drives when they came out. LTO drives are about $5,000 drives. They don't have all the fancy mechanisms to write the tape and all that servo feedback loop to make it run perfectly through the drive. Right? That sophistication's out of them because they're a $5,000 drive. So if you damage an edge, you can see on shipping in. Now, and yes, the drive will ride around it. But when it's a drop, it's usually significant. It's usually going to be at least one level, one wrap, usually more, and it will grow. So those are, it's just so chancy.
So the general rule is if there's physical damage on the delivery container,
don't
send
accept
it.
it. Yeah, there's no reason to accept it. So, at any rate. And then if you, one of my tips later on, from an offsite storage facility is if you do see a cartridge come in, even from your customer that's damaged, or you have some damage in your facility, report it, because it's much cheaper in the end of the day. So, at any rate, so this thing, going back, there was another thing that fell out of here. I don't know if you saw that. Have you heard of the RFID chip? That's the RFID chip that's in this cartridge.
So that's what rattles around.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's not, it's not welded or anything. It's just placed. You see the little section, it's like on the base that has the little hole. There's a section that has a little rectangle, kind of like its own little popper.
Yeah.
That's where that goes. And it's very happy there. So yeah. So any questions on the tape, you can, like I say, take these back. I didn't go through the door mechanism here. The door mechanism, this thing here, is the door mechanism. It's got a spring. You see it? And that actually goes in one of the sides. You can see a hole. It's got the little bump facing out. So you just have that in here, and you can see how the door actually works. Which is kind of cool. At any rate, a little bit off or something. So,
Is the RFID chip and all Imation tape?
LTO, all LTO. And I think maybe some of the teeth, the higher, above LTO, like T10,000 and some of the products above will have it. But it's part of LTO. And we do a whole lot more with it than what we're talking about here. So again, just net out of here, I wanted to give you a sense that this thing is heavy. It's got thousands of feet. It's very thin, and it's very strong when it's used in the direction that it's intended to. When it moves in directions, especially ones that have force. And just from point A to point B isn't going to do it. But if you've got a force situation, if you've got a lot, a large move, usually we say a meter, or on a hard surface, that's going to be the issue. All right, so that's that. Now, we have another piece of paper in front of you. I want to help relate what's on this happy tape. So, on this cartridge, this picture basically on the far right, you've got the same one on the far right, that was a 3480 cartridge. That was, so on the same half-inch of tape, because the form factor hasn't changed, the same half-inch of tape, we got 18 tracks. That was the product that came out in '85. I'm sure a lot of you still have a bunch of 3480 in your vaults. Just 3480, it was out there, right? Lots of that stuff there. So 18 tracks on a half an inch. So with your mind's eye, you can pretty much look at that and say, yeah, I can divide that into 18 pieces. Now, as we move through our different technologies, we've moved into from chrome now into some of those MP particles I talked about, MP1 and MP2. You can see that now, for example, this is a 3590. I don't know if anyone here knows about a 3590 cartridge, but this is now what that smaller particle with a higher density can do. That's a track on a 3590 versus 1 track over there. So, and now I'm doing 10 gigabytes versus 210 megabytes. Now let's move over here. I didn't put on the cartridge we had in our hand just because you would be able to see it. You barely can see it now, but if you look really closely, about the width of my finger are the tracks that now, with that MP particle, we're able to get tracks that are that tiny in the same place where we had 1 track before. So now in your mind's eye, well, in the product we have, this one's 512, but in your mind's eye, can you split that into 700 pieces? And I guess, Gerald, going back to your question, a drop, or something that could be righted, you know, when you only had 18 tracks, but you can imagine the 704 tracks, they're written end to end and they're very tiny. So less amount of bend is going to cause a bigger problem. Makes sense.
Data is written to a track.
I'm sorry?
How much data is written to a track?
Depends on the product. Depends on the product. But for, let's see here, for, let me get one that I can do easily. Like for 512, I guess you could, yeah, divide 512 by 200 gigabytes. Right.
Are the horizontal lines blocks? Is that what they represent?
Are they what?
Blocks? What are the horizontal lines?
That's inter-track spacing. And by the way, the tape is facing this way. This is the half-inch this way. Right? Does that make sense? So this is, so across this half-inch. So I'm holding the tape this way. Yeah. And there's 18 across the half-inch. The tape going right. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. So, and let me see if I've got this. I need something like a, let me say this is a defect here. You know, that's a defect on that track. Actually, a defect, if you have 25% of the signal remaining, then you still can do that bit. So if I have this here, I have more than 75% track remaining, I can easily read that bit on that technology. If I come over here, what happens? I'm wiping out tracks and tracks and tracks. So again, just to give you a feel of how much is written in with the density. Now I'm going to take it one step further. You have another page there. We call this our book example. And I want you to look at there's a couple grayed out areas. We're going to start here. This is really busy, so I'm only going to take you through a couple. But we'll take this grayed out area, and we're going to look at book number 1. We're going to book A. Book A has got 500 pages in it. That's our example. Book A has 500 pages. If I write it on a 3480 cartridge, it's going to take me 54 inches to write that book on a 3480 cartridge. Now, if I kept writing that book over and over and over on the same 3480 cartridge, I could write 124 of those books on that 3480 cartridge. Now let's go over to the Gen 3 cartridge that we've been working on here. Now I'm going to write a 500-page book. There it took me 54 inches. 54. Now it's going to take me 0.18. Is it 64? Yeah, I can see my glasses. And then I'm going to come over here, Gen 3, it's 0.18, right?
You're on Gen 2 then.
Oh, sorry, Gen 3, okay.
Gen 2 is
0.18. Okay, Gen 3 is 0.10. So 0.1 inch to write that 500-page book versus 54 inches. Right? So that's how much material is on that. I can write 100, I can write almost 250,000 books, 600-page books on that one cartridge. Right? So you're getting a feel for exactly how much data is on these things and how it relates to what we understand in the material. Now, the terabyte cartridge is what we're working on today. The terabyte cartridge, you'll be able to do 0.04 inches will write that 500-page book. 625,000 books, 500-page books, if I wrote them all on that one terabyte.
And just to give you shows you the portion of data and what's happened as far as it migrates to 1 terabyte. People are putting, this will be 8 gigs, I think, by the end of the year on a USB.
Now, all right, so now that you have an understanding of how much value is on that, why do we need to preserve the value? Well, what's at stake? In terms of what's at stake, the risk of data from a single drop in a 1 terabyte cartridge versus a 3480 has gone up astronomically, as you've just seen. It's important to remember that it's not about just the cost of the cartridge, it's about the cost of the data on the cartridge. And I'm going to give you some examples of what that looks like. And there are businesses who cannot survive. If the wrong cartridge is damaged, their business is not able to survive. So that's how critical this data is. So consequences, these are absolutely real. Each one of these is a real event that happened. So we had a company, an HMO, who every month had to supply data to the state agency to get reimbursed for the services rendered to their members. They sent a tape. The tape, for whatever reason, was not able to be read. The window passed because there was just a one-time window, so that agency had to wait and resubmit back the next month. So the interest in the money they would have got, the interest lost was $15,000. That was for one tape. We had another incident, and any of you, I know a lot of you are from this Houston area, you know about the big geophysical vessels that pull the big, octopus type of tentacles down, and streamers, what are they? Long streamers. Oil fields up there.
Bullshit.
Oil stuff. They've got these sound receptors on the streamers, and they fire a sound at the bottom of the ocean, it bounces back up, and then these receivers catch the information and send it back to the mothership. And the mothership is quickly trying to, get that data, that real data that's collected in the field onto tapes, in the drives that have tapes in it. In this particular case, they missed an entire area. So they had to turn this boat around, and it's a big boat, and to the tune of $500,000. So it was probably 3 or 4 cartridges that did that. And then the next one, losing the backup copy of a credit card company's member list. I put priceless. I want to be mean, but it's not priceless. I'm sure there is a price that could be assigned.
Probably never happened before, but.
Huh?
That's probably never happened before.
It hasn't, but I was very close to a company that where that almost happened. They lost it, but they didn't. So,
Sure, it never happens to banks or anybody.
oh, you're on the Bank of America.
Yeah.
Or the government.
Better.
Right, I didn't even touch on. I could add 1,000 examples from Social Security. This is George Bush country, right? Okay, so.
You can do it in a cane. Just-
Okay, yeah. So, all right. So you understand the concept of how much a cartridge can cost. So how long are these things meant to last anyway? Well, I want you to understand the concept of media lifetime. And a cartridge is a durable good, just like anything else that we deal with in our daily lives. Media lifetime is dictated about how the materials that are chosen to make that product, how it was built, and how it's used, how much it's used, how and what way it's used. Beyond that, the lifetime can only be degraded by other events such as environmental, software, hardware, or type of process handling types of situations. Now, and the analogy I used in this one, because everybody can relate to their car tires. Think about your car tire. You go out to buy a car tire. You're going to buy a tire that is, built by the right guy, the right company that has a long-standing reputation. You're going to build it out with the materials that you know are going to be standing up to the task you want. And you're going to basically know, okay, this is how I use it, and based on how much I use it, I'm going to change that tire, after 5,000 miles or 10,000 miles or whatever it's going to be. Now, if you, with that tire, don't maintain a proper inflation, or my 17-year-old son who I think forgets that air is needed in tires. It's usually they're always thrown out inside. Or run into a curb or a pothole or over a strip of nails or drive in extreme conditions. That tire is not going to last to the manufacturer's specification. So media, another durable good, is the same thing. You know, what we try to do is make a high-quality product that has strong durability, that will stand the test of time. But beyond that, you know, these other things can certainly be detractors to the life of that media. So, the one section I wanted you to really focus on here is the one where I have process and environment. So factors that affect media life, certainly there are things in the cartridge, you can read those later, hardware, but predominantly the ones that I want to talk about are this process environment, the quality of the storage environment, you know, the temperature, the humidity, and the cleanliness, and also the processing practices versus handling, storage, and offsite storage. So those are just the general categories. Now what I wanted to do is cover with you, I think I have 8 tips here that we have a DVD, I don't know, so I think they tried to send it out over the website or something.
Great.
It did come out?
Yeah.
Some people got it. Some people couldn't load it. Some people could. Well, that DVD was catered to end users, but what we did is I just kind of changed these around a little bit to be more to what you do, more to the offsite vaulting. So the points here, utilize handling practices that minimize shock to either cartridges or multi-cartridge packages. And that's something, that should be fairly obvious. I mean, if, a guy is, chucking a box across, that's probably not. But, or a box comes off and then drops from, the end of the conveyor down a meter. That's not a good practice. So it's worthwhile just taking a tour of your facility and trying to see, are there any particular areas that we need to look at. Also, assure that anyone who handles a cartridge or multi-cartridge package understands the basics of media handling. Doing all the right things, if the guys who handle it, whether it's the truck drivers or the people inside, they don't understand how to handle it, well then how can you expect that they're going to know what to do? When you look at the thing, it looks like an elephant could stand on it. Because, many data centers, I just go in there and they play hockey with them. They have these poles and they're shooting them across the data center floor at night when they're tired. It's a nice game.
Isn't a lot of tape delivered by UPS and carriers like that? I can't imagine they train all their drivers how to
They are,
handle those
but
boxes.
we actually have 2 different kinds of packaging that we use when we ship from our facility. And the packaging that we use we have pallet packages and packages that can be broken up by distributors. The ones that are broken up by distributors have like an inch of corrugated all the way around them, and then they have these shock absorber bricks in the box. So that's how it goes to a distributor. If it goes on a pallet, then it's different because you can't throw it. Now we also have to talk to customers coming back, who are sending, like people who are sending tapes, customer to customer. One Visa location is sending tapes to the other Visa location. We do a lot of library assessments and we give them the same talk and basically show them, this is what we ship your data in to get it to you, which is 10 times better than what you're shipping your cartridges in when they have data to the next guy. So what's wrong with this picture? We're doing this just to make sure that the cartridge has no data, but gets to you in good shape. So it's an education process. And certainly, as we go up, you're going to hear more and more and more about this. If you haven't already, people are going to want to know where the cartridges are in your facilities. I mean, if you've got a 1 terabyte cartridge, 2 terabyte cartridges could basically capture a whole public library system for use. And we're talking huge amounts of data in very small places. So the rules are going to be different for how they're going to want to, how they want to know how they're taking care of, how you're taking care of them on the facility, and so on and so forth. Now, notify a customer if a cartridge or a box experiences a drop. If there's any evidence of damage or dropping it, then you want to make sure that they're aware. Perform annual inspections of cartridge and rack to make sure they don't impart debris or damage to the cartridges. That's, makes a lot of sense. Don't expose cartridges to extreme conditions. We have a lot of information on our website, and I'm going to show you a chart here in a minute that shows the optimal conditions, but again, you can get it from the website. Assure the cartridges are not exposed to dust and debris. If you have some construction that needs to be happening, then, use those plastic things, do your best to shelter the cartridges away from whatever work there is. That would be just a good practice to get into. Don't place cartridges in the proximity of large fields, such as those created by degausers or high power lines. Now this may sound like, who would ever do that, but I was in a very, very, very large vaulter in California, and they had this huge big metal box that looked really convenient to store all the tapes, and it was a power box. It was like, what? They said, well, it's not magnetic. And I'm like, remember in your physics class where you have current this way, it creates a field in a perpendicular direction? No, he didn't remember the right. He didn't remember physics. He didn't remember high school. But yeah, that's just bad. So use the appropriate containers for shipping and storing cartridges outside the data center. They should include shock absorption. They shouldn't shed debris. Protect the cartridges against debris, excessive humidity, and moisture. I think the other thing here, and one thing I want to share with you, there are a number of very good vendors out there making containers. We have DataWare here. We have Permastore here just a little bit. We still have some Permastore stuff here. Some of this here. I also wanted to let you know that Imation has decided to get into this business as well. And they asked me to this is the only advertisement I have, to put in their storage case. So this is something that's just being field tested as we speak. It's called data guard, transport, and storage case. The target is first terabyte class storage. So we have done shock testing, G4 shock testing, saying that this outperforms other cases 2x to 4x. I don't know who the others were that they compared it against. That's the disclaimer there. Features include different interchangeable units, and there's no debris, no foam. They're airtight, they're watertight, and they have HEPS, so locating devices to come. At any rate, field testing now, and if you want to know anything more about it, my associate over here, Ed Mendel, is the guy that talks.
Mary, can I ask, all of the cases that are here today are plastic.
Mm-hmm.
Why did Imation go for a plastic case and not a steel one, like say like the Douglas containers?
The steel ones are best for the steel, but also they weren't the best for shock absorption, what they transferred to the cartridge. What we're looking for here is the Volvo experience. We want, if something gets dropped, a Volvo, supposedly somebody hits you on one side, but passengers and everybody are floating in this little compartment, and they take the minimum amount of the G-force, right? But the body they mangled on the outside. That's the whole thing. Well, the steel case pretty much is a good conduit for the energy to go right into the cartridges. So they're not really good. They're good for standing up for a long time. They last forever. They're not as good in terms of imparting shock to the cartridges, which is really what we're talking about.
So if you look at the biggest player in our industry, which is Iron Mountain, who use steel containers, are you in the process of re-educating them to move towards plastic?
Well, I think I don't know if that's something certainly that would be a nice thing to have happen, but it's hard to imagine that a data center that's invested in all these boxes, or an Iron Mountain, who has these in inventory that's now doing business with a particular vendor. It's hard to imagine that they're going to get rid of all that initially, but maybe what they would do is say, hey, let's use these metal boxes for the old vintage stuff, the 3480s, the 3490s, that kind of stuff. Let's use, if we're going to buy something new rather than buying more of those steel ones, let's go to something for the higher density, high capacity products.
Actually,
That would make more sense.
Iron Mountain is, they've manufactured their own container. It's
I thought
pretty similar to that.
they were going to do something, get away from the metal cases.
It's similar, that's a resin container. So.
Okay. I think this cost.
Container.
Huh?
It's a cheap looking container. I was surprised at how inexpensively it was made. Has anybody else seen those things?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if the metal's expensive. I do know that a lot of people are now shipping, it used to be 25 miles away. Many more customers are starting to ship further distances, or air freight stuff, and that kind of stuff. So, I mean, I don't think that's 90%, I think that's 10% of the base, but, so having something that has that ability to, be light enough to ship was a container of those metal boxes would be. So anyway. So, any more questions? My guy, Ed.
I have, if Chris and Nurse only talk. I've been in the business, and one of the things that I've really pushed is I know Michael and Chris very well enough for the past 6 years. This BareMetal conference came up, and I really pushed to be a participant in it. And it's because the past 25 years I've been in the sales side of things. The last 5 since I've known, the last 6 since I've known Chris and Michael has been the best experience for me. And basically what I've been doing, and Michael mentioned this in his presentation, what can you get out of this meeting? There's one thing I can deliver for you. If you can utilize Imation, because we're calling on the same customers. And what I'm basically doing is every customer I talk to here in Houston, Austin, San Antonio, the state of Louisiana, I'm mentioning BareTrust. I don't get any credit for the business. I just turn it over to Michael, and it's basically a synergy. And it's basically we're calling on the same customers, and what I basically do is we have some agreements we put in place at Imation that allow me some money. So I'll give a customer, like for instance here at Houston Enterprise, 2% of what they purchase from me, I give them back in the form of a rebate. And what I basically do is tell Michael and Chris, hey, here's 2%. I'll pay for it, go get the customer. But we're calling on the same customers. And I know I talked to Darren in Seattle. Imation people are everywhere. We've got 17 reps, and believe me, we're talking to the same person. There's not one sales call I make a week that BareTrust, what it says. There's not a sales call I make every day that I don't mention BareTrust. So that's where Imation really helped you. I mean, as if there's the presentation Mary says the value of data, and the whole point of it is that you guys are carrying 400 gigs on this little tape right here, which is a company asset. And that's the whole idea, because people don't want to see me to sell tape or listen to me on my tape story. But if I bring in off-site bulk tape storage, believe me, I get in the door. So the point is that if you need any help with Imation people, Darren knows the people in Seattle, but they're everywhere, Dallas, Denver, I mean, everywhere we talk to, they have a use for off-site storage and tape bulk. So I encourage you, if you need a list of the Imation people, Michael has it, but I talk to Michael 5 times a week. It's definitely some synergy.
Yes.
Right. What material is the tapes made from, like say the LTO cartridges?
The LTO cartridges, it depends on the cartridge and it depends on the films. When you start, these typically, polyethylene terephthalate is the base film. Everything up through LTO. LTO is more polyimide type base. The chrome then on the top, it's either going to be chrome for the older stuff or these MP particles, which again are going to be a metal particle of some description. It might be iron, it might be chrome, but it's going to be doped and to the extent that it will have other properties, making it smaller. So basically you build the film, you build the particles, you have a process that you put it into a solution that's usually a polyurethane, and then you coat it onto a base, usually like I say, PET, polyethylene terephthalate, or one of the higher level ones for the higher level products.
And the surrounding plastic?
Pardon?
The surrounding case, the actual...
Oh, that is polycarbonate, high density polycarbonate.
One last question on that. How flammable are they?
How flammable? Well, we have an MSDS that will tell you what they are. So this, I guess I couldn't tell you off the top of my head.
Polycarbonate's pretty burnt.
Pardon?
It's pretty burnt state.
Yeah.
Won't burn.
So I have to get that for you. It might be something that you could even get on our website. But Ed, can you get this gentleman's name and
Sure.
then I can send him something? Or I guess what I could do is just make that a note, and then I'll send the information to the entire group, and then you'll be on our list.
Cheers.
Yeah.
ferrous metal oxide to the chromium dioxide substrate. There was BASF and IBM had a several million take recall because of the breakdown of the substrate. I mean, in silence because of the heat differential between the top
That
and
was
bottom.
passive.
That's what?
That was passive.
Okay, all right. But
Not argument.
what's the substrate of these cartridges, and is it susceptible
That's
to the
it.
same problem?
Yeah, and the massive problem wasn't actually the substrate, it was the coating on the top.
Cut off some of the-
Yeah, and what had happened is, I mean, the problem with that was they, way up at the beginning when they were milling the particle,
Yeah.
they used a quenching process. And a cost reduction came in where they didn't use the chemical to quench the heated particles. They did a water quench. The water quench started up hydrolysis, started the beginning of a hydrolysis action at the beginning of tape, that when you made it in cartridges and put it in the field, and put it in the silo where the temperature went up, it refired up the hydrolysis
But the
reaction.
industry's moved, the question I'm getting at, the industry's moved beyond that problem, so that's no longer a problem.
That was specific to Bassett. That was a bad decision on Bassett's part, yeah. So, I mean, not that other people haven't had. IBM did have an issue way at the very beginning, you know. So, if a vendor is making tape today, chances are, you know, they survived all that stuff. But yeah, Bassett's was unique too. It was a bad decision. It was a cost reduction. Okay, so this chart I just want to show, again, you can get it on our website, it should be in your package. But, you know, kind of what we like to see, in terms of the safe zone, below 90%, you know, you can be above, as high as 90% if your temperature is relatively low. But if you kind of look at, you know, there's this little sweet spot here that says, you know, for moderate temperatures and moderate humidities, the tape will perform really well. High humidity and high temperature degrades the life of the tape. Because the stuff sticks together. You know, just the humidity, everything sticks together. So it's just not good for the tape. Anyway, but I think most of y'all have, you know, that's probably one of the least things. That's usually when the onset your facility is built to have the kind of controls you do. So current and emerging technologies. So magnetic tape is going to continue to dominate this backup and archival for the foreseeable future. So Imation is continuing to invest in other tape technologies. Tera-angstrom is what we're building today. That's what is coming out of that plant in Weatherford. That's all the LTO products. And that involves the servo and the cartridge technology. We're moving into multi-terabyte systems. I'll talk a little bit about that. And also I'm going to talk about some exploratory and discuss tape. I'm just going to touch on these because this definitely isn't my foray. So early on, when I first started talking, I was talking about the reel-to-reel stuff. We were talking megabytes. We went into gigabytes, certainly with the high-density stuff. We're in terabytes now using the Imation patented tera-angstrom technology. Where we're going is actually looking at sputtering. That's the surface, and we've already touched on that earlier. Multi-terabyte systems. Here, we are leading this effort with several different universities. We're targeting 4 to 32 terabytes worth of data. And this is actually where we are sputtering, like you sputter high-density disk on media. So we're doing a sputtering process on tape. Rather than we were talking, the question that was asked, how do you make the film? You know, we mill it and then we coat it. Well, this will be sputtered as opposed to a coating process. So you can get much thinner layers. It'll help also if we go to a holographic types of techniques. Commercialization in 2008, 2009.
I got a dumb question. I don't know what sputtering is.
Sputtering is something that's, what happens is, do you know the making of silicon small signal or like devices or integrated circuits? It's basically in a chamber. It's a high pressure chamber, and you have a target, which would be our tape. Mostly now they do it with silicon. They put a piece of silicon in a chamber, and they have a source, a metal source, and they hit it with whatever beam, something, you know, depending on what type of sputtering it is, and that is able to take off fine layers and coat it on, because you're in a high pressure vacuum, onto the wafer. Well, we're taking that technology and moving it into tape. So it'll involve some type of a, you know, some system under atmospheric condition, high atmosphere, a target metal, and a process to impinge on these that will then sputter like
Is
thinly
that in
onto
the
that tape.
manufacturer of the tape, or is that in the read and write of the tape?
No, that's the making of the tape.
Does that mean that you're able to put a thinner coat on? Is that the
Yes, I guess it, well, and high density discs are exactly that. You can put angstroms on versus microinches. So, because you can imagine what we're dealing with are slides and these little slot types of coating that this has to flow through. But if you don't have to have all that other, you don't have to, all the chemicals are just to put that into solution to get it to flow through this thing. But with sputter, you don't need to have any of it. It's just the pure metal sputtered on these lengths of tape.
And that makes it easier for the head to write it or read it?
Well, what it does is it